everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. I was just talking the other day with Matt Reiner, who is with us today, that we are on episode 49 of season 5. And we were hoping he was going to be episode 50, but it didn't work out that way. Anyway, Matt is a content creator from K15T, which is a company that provides applications and solutions for Atlassian. But he's worked on multiple product teams for a couple of different companies. He's done everything from, I like that term, Scrum Master. I always think that's a really official, fancy term. Technical writer, marketer, content designer, and a speaker. You've been at a lot of conferences I saw, most recently at LavaCon, which is like one of the conferences to go to for technical and content strategy. So that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also saw that you have in your profile or in your LinkedIn, or not, sorry, your LavaCon bio profile said that you specialize in the weird ways that content brings the world together. And I thought, oh my God, that is so cool. What the heck does that mean? I'm going to have to ask him. So welcome, Matt. What the heck does that mean?
Thank you. That's a good question. I mean, that bio, I wrote that a few years ago when I was like, okay, everybody's specializing. So what is my specialty? And yeah, I just like looking over my career, it's like, no matter what I've been doing, whether I'm like a tutor in university to working as a Scrum Master to being a technical writer to being a content creator, it's always like this world of content, but I'm working with teammates or I'm working for, customers and users who don't know they need content, but they need content. They need the other things too. But in the center of it all is content. So it's like, well, okay, I'll just put myself right in the middle of that and own the weirdness of everything comes back to content. And I'm pretty good at that stuff.
Yeah. Well, just based on some of the stuff we talked to getting ready for this episode, you definitely know a lot and have a lot of interesting things to say. So I want to really kick it off with, I guess, the question that's probably the first question everybody asks everybody these days. And it's all about AI. So we're kind of surrounded by conversations about AI and that we have to embed it in everything we do. So obviously product content and product information is not going to get away from that. So I was just curious, what conversations are you hearing? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
Well, actually at LavaCon, there were lots of great conversations about, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Sometimes I lean toward the negative and I'll just kind of careen off there because you can see a world where, oh my gosh, this could be bad. I don't think Skynet bad, but more like misinformation everywhere bad.
Right.
But on the positive side, I've talked to content professionals, I've talked to a bunch of product managers at conferences this year, and everyone is really excited about being able to draw out insights with AI, just, thinking about, we have 100 pieces of user feedback and we can use a tool that will give us insights in a snap, be able to parse through that. And then also the ability to look back at old information that we have and draw out insights there as well. What did we do in the past? Why did we do it in the past? Teams are really, really, really excited about that. Yes, product teams are also trying to build AI in all sorts of crazy ways, but really there's an excitement about drawing out valuable pieces of information using AI, with some caveats. But that's what people are really excited about.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I think as long as we use it the right way and we think about it carefully, then it's kind of really neat to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the ways that I was thinking about it when we started talking about some other stuff was in-app messaging, and you can use it there. You can use, actually, some people might be replacing in-app messaging with chatbots, which, internal chatbots. And I'm just curious about your kind of thoughts, because I don't think people put a lot of emphasis or thought behind how they create in-application messaging. They create lots of great product documentation. Maybe not, maybe not. I don't know. But I don't think they put as much thought into that in-app messaging. And now I think they might be thinking, well, AI is just going to take over that anyway.
Yeah. Well, there is that age old, well, I don't know if it's age old, but certainly I've experienced where everyone's like, oh, the new technology is going to replace the last thing.
Yeah.
We saw this in the content world. There was a huge push when like iOS apps became a thing, and eventually Android apps. And the big push was around design, which, like, thank goodness, information experiences or user experience has come so far in the last 10 years. But there was this big push for like, oh, the UI is going to guide everyone. This is going to replace the need for documentation and most UI text because it's just going to be so intuitive
Hmm.
that, and we'll use progressive disclosure. And so people won't even need to read. They'll just be able to feel it out. Right. And that hasn't quite happened. Instead, right. IX, or information experience, has kind of come out of that, which is like, okay, we need to bring information and UI together. And so I think AI is, AI chatbots and integrating AI into search boxes and things like that. I think that will supplement some of that in-app information, but really I don't think it can replace it. And one of the things that we're dealing with right now is we're in this world where we have all these tools where you can embed different kinds of information in your product. Like, oh, I can add a little bubble down here that people can click and it'll connect them to support chat and it'll give them some knowledge base documents and things like that. And then there's another element over here that's guiding people through a guided tour. And then there's another element over here, which is actually just text in the UI. And there's another element over here where they can pull up, the full documentation site. And so there currently, in some products, there's a really disconnected collection of information that's accessible in different ways. And yes, it's good that we're giving users all that information, but no, it is not a good experience. And I feel like it's kind of like back in the day when we had like AOL Messenger and ICQ and IRC. Like, there was so much spread of those, it was kind of a mess for users. And then it kind of came together and it sort of exploded again. But we need to kind of start bringing things together. And I think AI could be a good application of that, bringing together some of those information sources into one experience where
Right.
our users, God love them, thank them for holding on with us. They could just ask, give me an answer, and then it will pull from all the sources. That would be a magical thing that AI could do for everyone.
Yeah. So there's no one tool that product management can use to create all their applications. It's kind of a process that puts together multiple tools.
Yeah, I mean, product development is for good reason. It's a very cyclical process. We use a lot of different tools and a lot of information. It's only valuable in the short term anyway, right? Especially if you're using Agile and Scrum, you're just chugging along, cranking out user stories and test plans and UI diagrams. It's kind of a mess. We got tools everywhere, and that's fine as long as we then like draw out the valuable stuff and put it in places that are valuable for the long term. And traditionally those places were like, our user documentation and our knowledge base and support, articles to help our support team.
Mhm.
But now we're talking maybe a little bit less about those things, just more like, okay, where do we take out the good stuff and put it in a place where our generative AI can get a hold of it and give people answers. So while the, where we're putting it might be changing a little bit, there's still that process of drawing out the good stuff, putting it over here. That needs to continue, because like AI can't fix bad content. That's
Yeah.
not what it's there for.
Or
Definitely.
multiple copies of content and not knowing which one is the right one.
Yeah, that's a big problem. Rahel Bailey is who she's an incredible content expert. She
Yep.
is all about that, and I've heard so many talks from her where she talks about like the amount of time teams are spending sorting out which is the valuable version. Right? We have 10 different versions of even the smallest things, like a decision that we made on what this feature does. We have 10 different versions of it across 4 different tools. Which one's the right one? Okay, finally I found the right one. Hopefully you go and clean up the other ones, right? There is no way, as a generative AI is today, that is happening. That kind of like, what is meaningful information, it's just not capable of making those kinds of decisions. And I think we're going to need quite a few logical jumps to get to that point.
Yeah.
It could happen, but we're not there yet, and that's where I start to get a little dark with AI, maybe just a little bit.
I thought it was interesting. One of the other things that you'd said to me was that you don't believe in, well, you don't believe you should archive content, that you need to delete content. and because that can mess with the searches and the AIs as well, how what the AI does.
Yeah. So anyone who's worked on a product team, especially if you work with individuals who are like more risk averse, right? Or like people that are working in super analytical roles, or very very detail oriented folks. Maybe your engineers, maybe your test engineers. Um, when you mention to them, hey, we should delete delete this page that you've made or whatever, they're probably, that's not going to be good, right? Because there's security and like, no, I made that information. That's valuable information to me. And what if I need that in 4 years? But, often what people forget is like, even a year of time in the product world is like an eternity. Like
Yeah,
if you're keeping your UI mock-up from a year ago, that's going to change so much. It's going to be completely like worthless essentially. So when we don't delete stuff, it's bad, right? Because then if I search for latest version of UI diagram, all of the UI diagrams are going to pull up, and I have to go through the mental effort of figuring out which one is the newest one. And especially if I'm a new team member, I'm going to be completely
mm,
unable to do that. So
yeah,
that's going to be a huge time waste. But then also it just ruins search. It ruins search for everybody because it's like, I don't know what the right thing is. There's a lot of things.
yeah,
And then archiving can be a little bit better depending on how whatever tool you're using has implemented archival. But often things that are archived still show up in search.
yeah,
Or we're like manually just writing like archived on it, in the title of the document or whatever, and it still shows up in search.
yeah,
So archiving is great if you're like, okay, we might be audited, so we legally have to keep it around. But our avoidance of to delete things is really causing a lot of problems. We need to delete, especially as product teams. There are some things that are great for long term. Many things that we create need to be just done away with.
yeah. I suspect there you've got an engineer going, I want to see how I evolve my product from the very beginning, and they like to see that imagery or that code or whatever they're storing.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe, one technique could be you print it out for them, you make a little scrapbook, and then you say, I'm going to go delete the digital version now so it doesn't ruin our search forever.
Yeah, yeah, and put it on the shelf where you'll probably never ever look at it
Exactly,
again, but at
exactly.
least you know it's there.
Yes, and that never ever part, I mean, that happens so often with our information we keep around. Like we say, "Oh, this could be valuable." It never
Mhm,
is. It never ever ever is.
yeah. All right. Okay. Let's talk about this idea of teams experiencing information loss. What does that mean, and how do you know if that's happening to your team?
Yeah. So I have experienced this a lot in roles like being a scrum master. I was also like the administrator for some tools for the product team. It's very often that the team is generating really valuable information, or they're going off really valuable information that gets lost in our tools or gets lost in our process. So an example of that might be a product manager writes a user story and says, as this kind of user, I need to be able to do this thing, which is great because you can actually take those and take them all the way through the process to the end and write user documentation from them. Super useful. But then when the engineer goes to implement it, for example, they realize, oh, there was like a flaw in that logic, or we couldn't quite implement it that way. So they make just like a comment in the code. It's written right in the code as a comment, or maybe it makes it into like the source control tool, and it's like, I couldn't do that, but I did it this way. And the person reviews the code, it's like, oh, okay, slight change, that's fine, cool. And that never makes it out to maybe the test engineer, who then tests the feature and they're like, oh, this is broken. And then they have to go back and the engineer is like, no, it's working, right? That's a small version of it, but it could go as far as we release the feature and 6 months later, someone in support is trying to support this thing. And they're like, hey, I'm looking at the documentation here and it says that it should do this, but it doesn't. And the engineer's like, oh no, I changed that. The engineer says that after spending 8 to 10 hours going back in their code that they don't remember writing because they're writing code all day.
Yeah.
The time waste is like insane. So there's all this really valuable information, different types of information that our product teams make every day. and then we lose because we maybe don't see that it's valuable, or maybe it doesn't make it out of one tool into another. There's lots of different ways this can happen, but I've in many of my roles, I'm the person that's like running behind everybody, like picking this stuff up, like, oh, we're gonna need this, we're gonna need that, like, oh shoot, that needs to make it into the UI, um, all day long.
So that's like a role that someone should play on a team that kind of follows everyone around and looks for that stuff. Like,
Um, I have filled roles like that.
yeah,
On many product teams, sometimes that role is the product manager because already they're often the keeper of knowledge. But not necessarily, right? Sometimes it's, if you're a scrum master and you're not just helping the team manage their workflow, but you're also sort of paying attention to what is being said, decisions that are happening over a scrum meeting, or a weekly stand-up meeting or daily stand-up, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that sounds really important, we should write that down. Sometimes that's very often that's a technical writer who is having to write that documentation, and they're like, what's happened here? It could be a test engineer, it could be a product marketer. It's most definitely impacts support. In the end, support has to support the thing that we're making. And very often we don't give them that info. And so 2 weeks later, 2 months later, 2 years later, they're having to dig back in to figure that stuff out. So really, it needs to be an attitude the entire team has, sort of an additional sort of responsibility we all have. We all ship high quality code. We create really high quality design resources. We put out great marketing campaigns, and we make sure that our really valuable information that could save us so much time and money makes it out of our process. That has to be like top of mind. It's part of the product that we ship.
yeah. Does that mean that there could be issues or instances where a product marketer, for example, promotes a capability or a way of doing things that isn't really true because something hasn't been captured and documented properly?
Oh, yes. Yes, especially if you're in like a sales-driven organization versus a product-driven. I have been in those situations where like the sales team is like, we just sold this big deal and it's great. And the reason that we sold it was because this feature, they're really excited about how this feature does this.
Yeah.
And the product team is like, oh no, it doesn't do that. It never did that. Or, you almost got it right, but it's quite, it's slightly wrong. And some sales engineer was operating off, information they didn't get. And that's probably how that happened. And so, yeah, it can happen from marketing. It can happen from sales where, it kind of turns out you're completely misleading your users and nobody really knows that. It shouldn't be the marketing and sales team should not have to be archaeologists figuring out what what the product actually does. They
Yeah.
should be they should have a flood of that information, and then really their job is to just hone it down and really focus on the why and connecting that with jobs to be done for potential customers. They should not have to be guessing. They should not have to be asking engineers what happened. That should be offered to them on a silver platter.
Yeah. So how do you do that for them though? How do you kind of distill all this information that's kind of stored in so many different places in so many different ways into a way that they can get at it and kind of figure out what they need from it?
Some of that is like a tools thing, right? You have to agree on what is going to be the sort of source of truth. So my last two companies, our source of truth has been our Confluence site. So then, okay, cool, it's Confluence, or it's SharePoint, or it's trying to think of another example, Notion.
Yeah.
These are our sources of truth. Then you have to make a conscious effort, just like we, we build our code and we deploy it to someplace. We have to have that same concept around information. So there has to be, as part of your process, whether you're continuously delivering or you have, annual releases, you have to have a point there where you're like, okay, now it's time to pick up the valuable information, draw it out of our tools, and get it to that long-term place. That's what, if your team is lucky enough to have a technical writer, they've been doing that forever. That's
Yeah.
exactly what user documentation is, which is helpful to sales and marketing to a point, But
Yeah.
then there's this additional stuff, additional background information that it shouldn't live in your work management tools, so Jira or Asana or Trello. It should definitely shouldn't be notes in your code or in your source control. Like, it needs to make it out and
Yeah.
then into Notion, Confluence, SharePoint, um, to those engineers. So it really has to be, especially if a team does like a hardening sprint at the end. Again, I'm talking about Scrum here, but if you're taking some time to make sure your code is the best it can be, that is the perfect time to draw out that valuable information and write it in a way, even if you supply a fact sheet to your sales engineers and your marketing people, it is incredible the amount of time you'll save, um, and how much potentially more money you can make because it's factually all there. It's brilliant stuff, but it takes a consciousness from the team to
I
not lose
think
that stuff.
I think it's interesting because we always think when you're creating products, you think about the source code and the UI and all that side of it, but you don't realize how important the information around all of that is to the product, and that you need to manage it and think about it and deal with it properly. Like it's surprising how much companies don't, or product teams don't.
Uh, yeah, it's kind of scary. Like, I have a skillet, an electric skillet in my kitchen, and the knob, all of the degree numbers have worn off just from age.
Yeah,
And wow, is that product hard to use because that really valuable bit of information is no longer there. And you're just,
yeah.
you're kind of like using your fingers to figure out how hot it is. Not ideal. But yeah, it becomes, as our products become more and more complex, or even the services that we're providing, um, you know, doing a thought experiment of like, what would our product or service be with no content? Just sort of strip that away for a minute and realize it doesn't exist. Even if it's coded, even if people can see UI, without content, without that valuable content creating and completing the human part of the experience, it's nothing. And when it comes to supporting that product, we really ultimately want to give users the information they need to be successful through things like in-app messaging, great UI text writing, AI chatbots, so far as to even provide video content, for instruction and things like that.
Yeah.
If we're not enabling our users there, then they have to come back to support. So they're already mad, right? They're already frustrated because they're back to support. And then support, if they don't have the information they need, well, then, I mean, it gets worse and worse and worse. And support continues for a product company. Support, typically, the number of support reps you need grows linearly with your number of users, and not a one-to-one, hopefully not exponentially. But it will grow. It has to grow until AI gets good enough that we can provide real, proper, excellent support.
Yeah.
So we can minimize that by putting the information up front, and then secondly, getting the information to support so that resolution can happen as quickly as possible. And again, that's where AI tools can be applied really, really well.
Do you think that the ideas of self-service capabilities are not more important than support people, but that is there a similarity between how you create content for both of them? Like I think that's what I'm trying to ask, trying to figure out the right way to ask that.
Yeah. Yeah. So self-service is definitely where it's at. And I mentioned progressive disclosure earlier. That's like a design technique, which is
Mhm.
you're giving users the easiest, simplest to understand options first in their product experience, and then giving them more challenging, more advanced ones following. And
Yeah,
that's a terrible explanation, I'm sure, but information follows that as well. As they encounter more complexity, they need to encounter more information about that. So it has to be intuitive for a user to be able to get into that information. I think of Apple. For a time when you had an iPhone, you could press and hold something. They called it peek and pop is what it was. So if you held something a little bit like an icon for an app, a little menu would pop up and you would have some options. And then if
mhm.
you pressed a little harder, it would pop and you would have additional options. And it was really intuitive. Unfortunately, nobody knew that it existed, and that's gone now. But it was
I like that
progressively,
idea though.
yeah, giving more features and more information. And users need to be able to get into that information in ways like that. where it feels right in the UI to progress deeper into learning as they're also progressing deeper into the feature set and the value that we're offering. But
Yeah.
none of that is possible if we don't draw out that valuable information when we make the thing.
Right.
So it's like we can't have a great customer experience. We can't have people self-serving. We can't minimize support burden unless we're proactively pulling out that valuable stuff as we're building things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's talk about insights. Everybody's talking about capturing insights and doing stuff with them, but then they don't talk about where they document them or about how the decisions they made around those insights, like that. But that's an important thing to do, right?
Oh yeah, insights are everything, right? Insights are what cause founders to create companies. It's what causes product teams to shift direction completely. It's what creates competitive advantages. So many things come from an insight, and that can be you know, an aha moment someone has personally, or they're talking with a user, or they're just they can happen so many places. And those are the things that like spark huge changes sometimes for product teams. And then they tend to get lost somewhere between like getting funding for whatever the thing is and then like writing user stories for here's the thing we're going to build.
Right.
Somewhere in there that initial insight is lost. And what happens is you get into building the thing, or maybe maybe everybody knows what the initial insight was until you release it. At some point somebody just is like, why is it like this? Why did we do this? Why does it work this way? And then hopefully the product manager or someone is there and can answer that question. Otherwise no one really knows. So yeah, those are the insight is the start of everything. In fact, that insight that could progress through and benefit everyone all the way to marketing and sales, because that answers the really important why.
Yeah.
The why question, which is what often sales and marketing are having to repackage stuff under. That's the thing they need, is that insight. So actively documenting those things in a place where everyone can see it is really important. It shouldn't be in the head of product managers. The things that are just in product managers' heads are like insane to me. It's crazy.
It's kind of scary because when they leave, they take all that information and that knowledge with them. That's
Yeah.
the whole knowledge worker thing too, right?
Yeah. I had a fantastic colleague at a past gig, who was the person who taught me how to do technical writing and many other things that, I'm now an expert in. So thankful to Ted Husted. But one of the things he would say is we need to be kinder to our future selves. And part of that was documentation. He was our build engineer, and he was like the team psychologist who would like draw out some of these like areas where we're losing information, or areas where we're sort of like experiencing a problem, but we all think it's just me who's experiencing this, or it's just part of the testing process, and realizing, oh, this is a problem. And then he would decide, do we need to automate it to fix it? Do we need to document it to fix it? Do we need to change our process to fix it? So much of that, it was small and incremental, but
Yeah.
the amount of value we extracted out of our process over time was just like game changing.
Yeah, I can believe that. Like, it's pretty cool, kind of like a psychologist for
Yes,
pretty
yes.
cool.
Ted guided us through many, many things, and certainly taught me to respect information and documentation, both internally and externally. Just the value of it is like, it's
Yeah,
huge.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so then the other thing is, maybe you have your documentation done and someone's using it and they realize there's a mistake and they need it to get fixed, and you believe that you should enable edit and write access to everyone to kind of do that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that's like freaking scary.
Yeah. So in one of my past lives, I worked at a networking company, and we had just acquired 8 different companies. And I can't tell you how much of my day I spent trying to find information, which is so frustrating, and then
Mhm.
trying to edit that information. And I would be on the phone with technicians who are out on the site and they're looking at the server rack and they can tell me what's there. And then I'm looking at our inventory system and I'm like, okay, that's not right. I'm just going to change that so it's accurate. And then there's no edit button. And then I see a message that I have to open a case to somebody in support. And then, then it's going to kick off this whole email back and forth process. And I'm like, I have 2 minutes until my meeting. Never mind. Right. And that happens. It doesn't matter what type of team you're in. If you have your tools or your processes locked down, this happens all the time. And it kills me when leaders are like, well, you know what? The organization is big enough that each department, we're going to decide on our own tools, which like whatever, use whatever tools you want. But then only people in this department will have access to those tools. And
Right.
then that is just like the biggest silo, the biggest killer of innovation and collaboration. It's just the worst. And I'm not saying like open your HR information or salary information, stuff like that. Like, no, no, no. Lock that stuff down. I'm talking about the team's SharePoint or the project plans or whatever it is. Open that stuff up. Definitely give everybody read access. And if you can afford to, and I would argue the value given by giving edit access to everyone far outweighs the cost, the financial cost. Give everybody the ability to change things, because if I can't go and correct that piece of information that's on a document, not only will it mislead every human being who reads over it and says, oh, the team decided this, so I'll just go with that knowledge. God help us if we turn generative AI onto that content, because
Yeah.
generative AI is going to look at that mistake and say, that's information. And then it's going to write a really nice paragraph to us, completely inaccurate, but it's going to seem so convincing. And everybody's going to make decisions off that because it came out of our cool AI tool. So the implications of not letting people change and update information, letting information get stale, is going to become more and more impactful to our organizations as we have tools like generative AI that exponentially sort of amplify our access to that correct or incorrect information.
Yeah. So I suppose you could put workflows around that edit access, that someone saw it and could make sure that, yeah, it is right. Or if you're really working with the people who know the product and know what they're doing, there's a trust that should be there, that they're making the right changes.
Right, right. If it most definitely operate off of trust first. And if it is a tool that, maybe you need to be highly skilled to be able to modify that information for one reason or another. First of all, I would say consider replacing it because I don't know. We live in an age where things should be easy to update like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely you need to have a 1 to 2 click process for, please change this. This is what you should change, and send it off. In fact, I really love the feature that like Google Docs and Word have where you can suggest changes
Hmm.
and send those off to the author. I mean, if anyone who's listening is building products, add that feature. That's so huge, right? So like
Yeah.
if you're not giving people the ability to edit it, let them suggest edits right there in line with the thing they're looking at. Anything other than that is just going to stifle communication and lead to all sorts of stale information.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me a little bit about the work, the product, the kind of roles that you played. Like, is there one type of role that you really enjoyed over the other one?
Oh, wow. Each one has its own, fun things and challenges. Um, I mean, one of the things, so I have a computer science degree, and I never imagined that I would end up as a content creator. But one of the themes that has followed me all the way since university, when I was tutoring like math and English, which is still a surprise to me because I didn't think I was all that good at either of those subjects. But my manager said, like, you're not the teacher, you're just here to connect people with the resources they need to be successful. And that has just been my sort of mantra, is like, and that's why I care so much about content and information. It's like no matter what role I filled, it's like working with brilliant people or working with users who have a real thing they're passionate about, right? They're not passionate about using your product, they're passionate about accomplishing a thing. So how can I help enable that. So probably my current role is the one I love the most. So I'm creating a whole bunch of video content now, which is really interesting to take my background in computer science and then my, background in technical writing. So taking technically complex things and writing about them for real people. Now it involves this whole like human element, like quite literally me talking to real people, trying to make a video that people don't dread watching and something that they can empathize with and then they can learn from. I'm just wrapping up this video project on a very complex feature that I've spent hours and hours just trying to film myself saying these things, explaining these things, because it's really hard. It's really hard to find the right words. But wow, when you get something out there and you get a comment on the video that's like, this is exactly what I needed. Or you hear someone say like, we added this to the onboarding for our teams using Confluence because this video helped us so much. That's just like the best.
Yeah,
Absolutely the best.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Is that kind of why you one of the things that I saw you said was kind of baking in the love? Is that kind of part of that?
Yeah. I think like um life is tricky, right? Life is hard. And my company, we're making B2B applications, right? I mean, sometimes you just start a job and you don't get to pick your tools, and so, the tools at work that you hate because they suck, and the tools that you love because maybe they're not pretty to look at, but maybe they're easy to use, or it's easy to learn how to use the thing. And uh, I think that content, especially, really helps people who are trying to do a thing do that thing with your product or with somebody else's product. Thinking about things more like, what do people need to do and how can I enable that to happen? That's the best. And it can be particularly helpful if your product team isn't investing in user experience, right? You don't have a great design. It's a hard to use product, or maybe it's just complex. Using content to empathize with users and share, like, we do know what you're going through, here's how to do it. I think there's a lot of love and respect that we can give people as human beings who are trying to do something else with our products. And I think content is a major way that we get to do that.
Yeah. You certainly, from what I've seen of your videos and stuff and listened to, like, you certainly sound like you love what you're doing and you enjoy it. So I have a final question for you,
Okay.
and I never tell my guests what the final question is because it's just supposed to be something silly, and
Oh.
who knows if this one will land well or not. But I was looking through some of your social feeds, and I watched the video where you were standing there making fun of the plane going overhead while you were going to record something, and it's just made me wonder if maybe you wanted to be a comedian, and at some point in your life earlier on, just because you're so funny and you're so humorous in the way that you present information.
um, that is such a good question. Yeah. So the instance in question was, I live near a local small town airport, and
Right.
yeah, there was just like a prop plane going overhead, and I'm in the middle of a take, and it's just like, oh, okay. I think I might have sung in that.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. I'm like, I've realized I'm kind of an entertainer, personality wise, which I did not know. As a kid, I was the middle child of 5 kids, super quiet,
That's the same
afraid
with
to
me.
talk to the cashier. And so like very much just like, oh,
Yeah.
that's Matt over there in the corner. And then I've come to realize that once I get excited about something and I want to help something with somebody, it just all comes out of the box. So, do I use comedy, and do I use singing, and do I use a little bit of tongue in cheek to communicate things? Absolutely. And luckily, at K15T, they've let me be a little creative with some of our videos. Every once in a while, I'll throw a little something in there, or I mean, it's become more and more common
Yeah.
as I go along. My first videos are very serious and very corporate, not super corporate, but like, it's a business application instructional video.
Yeah.
And more I'm finding, and I think the last few years have really taught us all that we want humanity, we want connections, and video can be really just not fun to watch.
Yeah.
But if someone puts themselves into it, if we get to see more of their humanity, we get to hear their mistakes, we get to hear about their personal experiences. I just think that makes a better video, and I think that makes learning better. yeah, I mean, think of all the best teachers you ever had. It's the person who has a personality. We know a little bit about them. Yeah. So, am I very silly? Sometimes, yes.
They do say there's studies that say that people remember and learn things better when it's presented in a kind of a humorous or, lighthearted way as opposed to being so straight and serious all the time. So I think that's a great way to do stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. Whew, I'm glad it's not just me.
This has been a really great conversation, Matt. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Lots of good information on, dealing with product information stuff that I certainly never really thought about, even though I come from a technical, background. I didn't write technical documentation. I wrote content. I actually developed websites and stuff many moons ago. Glad I'm not doing it anymore. But I leave that to the experts. But it was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So thanks very much to everyone for joining us. And I want to say thank you to Ingenix, who is the sponsor of the Content Matters podcast. They are a leading provider in content management and customer experience software for the last 20 years or more. Lots of digital experience solutions to customers worldwide. And you can use Ingenix to build customer portals, websites, any kind of websites and web experience, documentation and knowledge base hubs. And you can learn more about Ingenix at ingenix.com. While you're over there, sign up for the newsletter so we can tell you more about the podcast. And yeah, if you have a chance and you're watching this or listening to this, please leave a comment or a rating. I really appreciate knowing how I'm doing. So, all right. So great. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Matt.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.